Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. Scout Kane stood up, her small voice cutting through the tense air like a lightning bolt, and named the person who shot her father, Drew Kane. The trial had already been volatile, with emotions running high on both sides, but when Scout asked the judge if she could speak, the room froze. Drew's heart nearly stopped as he turned toward his daughter, torn between pride in her courage and fear of what her words might unleash. No one expected that a child, especially one as observant and intuitive as Scout, would become the key to unraveling a mystery that had plagued Port Charles for months. Yet as Scout's eyes swept the gallery and finally locked onto a familiar face, it became clear that this was no childish imagination or confusion. This was the truth, raw and devastating, and once spoken, it would change everything for Drew, for the accused, and for the entire canvas of General Hospital. The shooting of Drew Kane had rocked the city to its core. A decorated Navy SEAL, a businessman, a father, and a man who had survived memory wipes, kidnappings, and betrayals, Drew had always seemed almost indestructible. But the night he was shot, collapsing in a pool of blood while shadows scattered into the darkness, shattered that illusion. From the moment the gunshot echoed, suspicion spread like wildfire. Was it mob-related? A political hit? A personal vendetta? Fingers pointed in every direction, toward old enemies, new rivals, even supposed allies. Curtis Ashford, Sonny Corinthos, Nina Reeves, Carly Spencer, and several others found themselves dragged into the rumor mill, each with motives dissected and alibis questioned. The police investigation moved slowly, hampered by half-truths and missing pieces, and as weeks turned into months, the case grew colder, the city more restless. Drew's recovery was long and painful, both physically and emotionally. While his body healed, his mind replayed the moment again and again, searching for a face, a voice, anything that could bring clarity. But the memory remained frustratingly blurred. Scout, however, remembered. She remembered more than anyone realized. On the night of the shooting, Scout had been closer than she should have been, hidden just out of sight, her world about to be irrevocably altered. Children notice things adults overlook, the sound of shoes on concrete, the way a person moves, the tone of a voice whispered in anger or fear. Scout carried those details with her, even when she didn't fully understand their significance. At first, she said nothing, sensing the danger, the weight of what she knew. But as the trial unfolded and the wrong person's life hung in the balance, Scout realized she couldn't stay silent any longer. The courtroom drama reached its boiling point during closing arguments. The prosecution painted a picture of calculated revenge, while the defense countered with reasonable doubt and circumstantial evidence. Drew sat at the plaintiff's table, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed forward, trying to remain composed. Scout sat behind him with her mother, shifting nervously, her small hands gripping the edge of the bench. She had listened to days of testimony, heard adults argue over facts and theories, and watched as people she trusted twisted the truth to protect themselves. When the defense attorney suggested that the shooter would never truly be known, Scout's resolve snapped. She leaned forward, whispering urgently to her mother, then raised her hand, her voice trembling but determined as she addressed the judge. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Children weren't supposed to testify like this, especially not without warning, but something in Scout's expression stopped everyone from objecting. Granted permission to speak, Scout stood up, her feet barely reaching the floor. She took a deep breath, her eyes finding Drew's. "Daddy," she said softly, "I know who did it." The room erupted in murmurs until the judge slammed the gavel, demanding order. Drew turned fully toward his daughter now, his face pale. "Scout," he said gently, "are you sure?" She nodded, tears pooling but not falling. "I saw them," she continued. "I heard them. I didn't understand everything then, but I do now." With that, Scout turned toward the gallery, her finger lifting slowly, decisively, pointing at the person who shot Drew Kane. The reaction was instant and explosive. The accused recoiled, shock and fury flashing across their face as the courtroom descended into chaos. Some leapt to their feet, shouting objections, while others stared in stunned silence. Drew felt as if the ground had vanished beneath him. The person Scout had identified wasn't a distant enemy or faceless threat, it was someone close, someone woven deeply into the fabric of his life. Betrayal hit harder than any bullet ever could. Memories rearranged themselves in Drew's mind, conversations taking on new meanings, moments of tension and secrecy suddenly glaringly obvious. Scout, still standing, explained what she had seen, the argument, the flash of metal, the sound that still haunted her dreams. Her testimony was heartbreaking in its simplicity, devastating in its clarity. As Scout spoke, flashbacks unfolded in the minds of those present. The shooter's motive became painfully clear: jealousy, fear of exposure, desperation to protect a carefully constructed lie. This wasn't a random act of violence, it was a calculated choice born of emotional turmoil and moral collapse. The prosecution seized on Scout's words, while the defense scrambled, attempting to discredit a child's testimony. But Scout's account was corroborated by overlooked evidence, a security camera angle previously dismissed, a timeline that suddenly made sense, a witness who now felt emboldened to come forward. One by one, the walls closed in. The shooter's denial grew weaker, their composure cracking under the weight of truth. Drew struggled with conflicting emotions as the revelation sank in. Anger burned hot and fast, but beneath it lay profound sadness. How could someone he trusted, someone who had shared his table and his confidences, pull the trigger? How had he missed the signs? For Scout, the moment was both terrifying and liberating. She had carried the secret alone for too long, afraid of hurting her father, afraid of what might happen if she spoke up. Now, standing in that courtroom, she felt a strange calm. She had done the right thing. Drew reached out, his hand finding hers, silently telling her how proud he was. In that simple gesture, the bond between father and daughter deepened, forged anew in truth and courage. The judge called for a recess, but the damage was done. News spread through Port Charles within minutes. Phones buzzed, whispers echoed through hospital corridors, and alliances shifted instantly. Carly Spencer demanded answers, Sonny Corinthos assessed the fallout, and Nina Reeves found herself facing uncomfortable scrutiny as old grudges resurfaced. Curtis Ashford wrestled with guilt over not seeing the truth sooner, while Laura Collins prepared for the political storm that would follow such a high-profile betrayal. Port Charles thrives on secrets, but when they come to light, the consequences ripple far beyond the individuals involved. When court resumed, Scout was gently questioned again, her story unwavering. The shooter's legal team attempted every tactic, suggesting confusion, coaching, emotional distress, but Scout remained firm. "I know what I saw," she said simply. "And I know what I heard." Her honesty cut through the legal maneuvering like a blade. The jury listened, visibly moved, many wiping away tears. This wasn't just a crime, it was a family tragedy, a community wound laid bare. By the end of the day, it was clear the verdict was inevitable. The truth, once spoken, could not be buried again. Outside the courthouse, Drew addressed the press, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He spoke of forgiveness, not as absolution, but as a path forward. He thanked Scout for her bravery, emphasizing that no child should ever have to bear such a burden alone. His words resonated deeply, reminding Port Charles that strength doesn't always come from fists or weapons, but from honesty and love. Behind the scenes, however, Drew faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust and redefining relationships shattered by betrayal. Healing would take time, and some wounds might never fully close. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. The shooter was taken into custody, their future uncertain, their reputation in ruins. Families were divided, friendships strained, and old alliances dissolved. At General Hospital, doctors and nurses debated ethics and loyalty as personal and professional lines blurred once more. Scout returned to school, trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy, while Drew adjusted to life after the truth, grappling with nightmares and newfound clarity in equal measure. Therapy sessions, heart-to-heart talks, and quiet moments together became essential steps in their healing journey. Yet even amid the darkness, there was light. Scout's courage inspired others to speak up, to confront secrets they'd been hiding out of fear or shame. Port Charles, a town built on drama and deception, found itself pausing to reflect. What does it mean to protect the people we love? At what point does silence become complicity? Scout's testimony forced everyone, characters and viewers alike, to confront these questions. Her small voice had made an enormous impact, reminding the world that truth can come from the most unexpected places. As General Hospital moves forward, the repercussions of Scout's revelation will continue to unfold. Legal battles, emotional reckonings, and shocking twists are inevitable. Drew's path will be forever altered, his relationships redefined by the knowledge of who stood by him, and who turned against him. Scout, once just a background presence in adult conflicts, has emerged as a powerful catalyst for change. Her act of bravery will be remembered as one of the most defining moments in Port Charles history. In the end, the shooting of Drew Kane was more than a crime, it was a mirror held up to the souls of those involved. And when Scout stood in that courtroom and spoke the truth, she didn't just solve a mystery, she shattered illusions, exposed the cost of betrayal, and proved that even in a world full of secrets, honesty still has the power to heal. For fans of General Hospital, this jaw-dropping twist will go down as a moment that redefined the show's legacy, delivering drama, emotion, and heart in equal measure, and leaving everyone asking the same question: after this, can Port Charles ever be the same again? The days following Scout Kane's courtroom revelation felt unreal, as if Port Charles itself was holding its breath. The shockwave from her testimony didn't fade once the courthouse doors closed, it intensified. Everywhere Drew went, he felt eyes on him, some filled with sympathy, others with disbelief. People whispered his name in hospital corridors, in Kelly's, even on the docks. The truth had finally surfaced, but truth, Drew quickly learned, doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings chaos. Scout struggled most in the quiet moments. At night, when the world slowed down, her bravery replayed in her mind, not as triumph, but as fear. She worried she had done something wrong, that she had hurt her father by speaking out. Drew noticed the change immediately. The little girl who once ran into his arms now hesitated, as if unsure whether she was still allowed to be a child after doing something so grown up. One evening, Drew sat beside her bed, gently explaining that what she did wasn't just right, it was heroic. He told her that courage doesn't mean being unafraid, it means telling the truth even when you're terrified. Scout cried then, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilling free, and Drew held her tightly, silently vowing never to let her carry such a burden alone again. Meanwhile, the accused shooter sat alone in a holding cell, replaying the moment Scout pointed her finger in court. That single gesture destroyed years of carefully constructed lies. Rage gave way to regret, and regret slowly morphed into panic. They hadn't planned on Scout being there that night. They hadn't planned on a child remembering every detail. And now, there was no escaping the consequences. When the guards escorted them back into the courtroom for the continuation of proceedings, their confidence was gone. Their shoulders slumped, their eyes hollow. Everyone could see it, the guilt was written all over them. The prosecution wasted no time capitalizing on the momentum. They introduced additional evidence that had been ignored or misinterpreted before Scout's testimony: gunshot residue inconsistencies, cell phone pings that placed the shooter at the scene, and a partial audio recording that, when slowed down, revealed a voice Scout had described perfectly. Each new revelation tightened the noose. The defense objected relentlessly, but their arguments rang hollow now. The jury had seen the truth in Scout's eyes. Logic merely confirmed what emotion had already decided. Outside the legal system, personal reckonings unfolded. Carly Spencer confronted Drew, demanding to know how someone so close could betray him so completely. Drew didn't have answers, only exhaustion. He admitted that maybe he'd been too trusting, too willing to believe people were better than they were. Sonny Corinthos, on the other hand, saw the situation through a darker lens. To him, betrayal was nothing new, but a child being forced into the role of truth-teller crossed a line even he found disturbing. Quietly, Sonny promised Drew that Scout would be protected, from the media, from retaliation, from anyone who might try to exploit her bravery. At General Hospital, the emotional toll was evident. Elizabeth Baldwin worried about Scout's long-term trauma, suggesting counseling and extra support. Finn questioned whether justice was enough to heal wounds this deep. Even hardened professionals felt shaken. Watching a child dismantle an adult's lies forced everyone to reflect on their own moral compromises. Secrets felt heavier now. Lies felt more dangerous. The media frenzy escalated quickly. Headlines screamed about the child witness who solved the case and Scout Kane's stunning courtroom bombshell. Drew tried to shield Scout from the noise, but it seeped in anyway, through classmates' parents, through television clips, through overheard conversations. At one point, Scout asked Drew if people would always remember her as the girl from the trial. Drew knelt in front of her, looking her straight in the eye, and said, "They'll remember you as the girl who told the truth." That's something to be proud of. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the shooter's resolve crumbled. In a stunning twist, they requested to address the court. The confession was halting, filled with excuses and justifications that sounded weak even to their own ears. They spoke of fear of losing everything, fear of being exposed, fear of Drew uncovering the truth they'd buried. But fear didn't excuse pulling the trigger. When they finally apologized to Drew and Scout, the words landed awkwardly, hollow and late. Drew listened, stone-faced. Scout listened too, her small hands clenched into fists. When the verdict came back guilty, the courtroom erupted, not in cheers, but in a collective exhale. Justice had been served, but no one felt victorious. The judge's sentencing remarks emphasized the gravity of the crime and the irreversible damage caused, not just to Drew, but to a child forced into the crossfire of adult mistakes. As the shooter was led away in handcuffs, Scout looked down, her expression unreadable. Drew wrapped an arm around her, guiding her out before the cameras could capture another moment of her pain. In the aftermath, Drew faced a new challenge: forgiveness. People urged him to let go of anger, to move on, but forgiveness wasn't simple. It wasn't a switch he could flip. He struggled with nightmares, flashes of that night colliding with the betrayal that followed. Therapy helped, as did long talks with Scout, where they shared fears and reassurances openly. Healing became a joint effort, a father and daughter learning how to reclaim their sense of safety together. Scout, slowly but surely, began to rediscover joy. She returned to her hobbies, laughed more freely, and even stood up for a classmate being bullied, proof that her courage hadn't faded. Drew watched her with quiet pride, marveling at her resilience. He realized that while the shooting had nearly destroyed him, Scout's strength had saved him in more ways than one. Yet Port Charles never rests for long. New questions emerged. Had the shooter acted entirely alone? Were there others who knew more than they admitted? Old enemies stirred, sensing vulnerability. Drew's role in the city, politically and personally, shifted. Some allies grew closer, others drifted away, uncertain how to face the man whose life had been so violently altered. Trust became a precious, fragile thing. In one of the most emotional moments yet, Drew took Scout to the docks, the place where he'd nearly lost his life. He told her he'd avoided it since the shooting, afraid of what it represented. Together, they stood there, watching the water ripple under the fading sun. Drew thanked Scout, not just for telling the truth, but for giving him the courage to face the past. Scout squeezed his hand and said, "We're safe now." Whether that was entirely true remained to be seen, but in that moment, it felt possible. As General Hospital moves forward, Scout's courtroom revelation stands as a turning point, a reminder that even the smallest voices can shatter the biggest lies. Drew Kane's story is no longer just about survival, it's about accountability, healing, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. The scars will remain, but so will the lessons. And in Port Charles, where secrets have a way of resurfacing, one truth now echoes louder than ever: sometimes justice doesn't come from power or influence, it comes from a child brave enough to speak when everyone else stays silent. And with that truth now woven permanently into the fabric of General Hospital, the question isn't whether Port Charles will change, but who will be brave enough to face the consequences next. In the weeks that followed, a quiet shift settled over Port Charles, subtle, but undeniable. Conversations grew more careful, secrets less casually shared. Scout's courage had changed the rules. People now understood that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, had a way of surfacing when least expected. Drew felt it everywhere he went, in the way people met his eyes, in the respect mixed with sorrow in their voices.